Okay, I'm continuing with the Tapestry by Edith Schaeffer. I'm on chapter 5. I took the holidays off to enjoy carbs and to have a lot of cortisol in my system. But now we are back to Edith Schaeffer. Anyone have any questions? Nope? Okay. Wars and Rumors of Wars, chapter 5. If anyone doubts the fall and the resultant abnormality of the universe, if anyone doubts that the war was a reality which started in the heavenlies, directly attacked Adam and Eve, continues through the ages, and infects as well as affects all human beings, it seems to me a small look at history and a glance at today's newspapers should be enough to emphasize the truth. Even pacifists use such warlike vocabulary in their defense of peace that it becomes an offensive attack as frequently as a defensive one. War is woven in and out of the tapestry of history from the very beginning, and God tells us clearly there will be wars and rumors of wars until the fantastic moment when the last war will be fought and peace will reign forever. Real peace, not a facsimile. So many of us have seen little boys lying on their tummies, fighting a battle with their tin or lead or plastic soldiers, or perhaps with wooden spools and toothpicks. If toy soldiers are denied them, many of us have watched little boys pick up sticks and shout bang bang if they are not allowed toy guns. Or we have seen them charge the enemy with fluttering bits of paper, ammunition. Space wars and armies arriving from other planets capture today's imaginations. And all too soon, the little boys are the men making decisions, whether in airplanes or warships or behind desks in a diversity of the world's capitals. The fall was a design of Satan's in his war against God. Fallen human beings have never since stopped being involved in some kind of war. The Bible tells us that we are meant to be fighting against evil and against the evil one. The whole Christian life is a battle, as Ephesians 6 puts it. This is not going to be any attempt to sort out the wars we need to mention in the history reported in this chapter, but only to relate what is glimpsed as a magnifying glass moves to look at some of the threads coming from my mother's background. Little girls have just as fiercely attacked or defended in their own way, or in whatever way has been opened up to them. Whatever they think or believe is worth attacking or defending. It's not necessary to go into the stories of Joan of Arc or other leading figures in history to remind ourselves of women who have affected history in their own particular wars for what they thought was right. Can't you imagine the passion that burned in the breast of a 12-year-old William Hargel as he heard of the Boston Tea Party and determined that he was going to do something to ensure freedom from unfair taxation and tyranny of various sorts? The burning desire to make the world better is in essence a good thing. It is sad to look back on the high hopes and expectations so often dashed to pieces in one lifetime or in the subsequent years. Yet always we can think, what would have happened if no one had ever stood up against oppression, if no one had ever fought for freedom, if no one had cared about equal opportunity and better conditions and the possibility of a fresh start for a young country? The Boston Tea Party was in December 1773. William meant to do something, and he finagled his way into the Navy far too young. Still, powder monkeys had to be young and small enough to slip into the small spaces required for their dangerous job. In this time of the Revolutionary War, America had very small ships which could not at all stand up against the large British Navy, but which nevertheless harassed the British merchant ships against tremendous odds. The little ships bravely charged out into their diverse attacks, 3 men manning each cannon. After firing, one of the men had to swab out the cannon with a kind of giant Q-tip, rags wrapped around a long stick. If he in any way did a careless job and left traces of sparks in the cannon, the powder monkey, that's what they called him, my great-great-grandfather William Hargel, also had as his job to carry the powder bags to the cannon at the proper moment. Oh, sorry, I skipped this. The powder monkey, if they didn't get all the sparks out of the cannon, they would be blown up. Now, as a teenage powder monkey, William Hargill also had the job to carry the powder bags to the cannon at the proper moment, jam the cannon full of the powder, and then step away to let a man do the finishing touches before the firing. Powder monkeys slept under the cannon and had to be ready at any time. No soft bed, no books or good food. This was war. William was captured and thrown into the prison of a British ship twice in his war experiences. He had had manacles on his wrists, which cut so deeply into his arms that many years later his little girl Abigail used to sit on his lap and put her fingers into the deep hollow places on his wrists left by the deep scars. He told of the cruelty of the British seamen on that particular ship. The cruelty of human being to human being must always hit us, whatever part of history we are reviewing. The conditions in the hole at the bottom of the ship where the prisoners were kept were indescribable. Overpowering stench, inadequate food, water, or airspace. If ever you have seen the old warship in Portsmouth Harbor, excuse me. Let's see, where am I? Which tourists may inspect, Lord Nelson's flagship, HMS Victory, you will have some idea of what William lived in the hole. Each night, a shot would be fired indiscriminately down into the dark, and in the morning, 2 men would come to drag away the body of whoever had been hit and toss him overboard. Can you imagine that? William had such a hatred of the British, whom he blamed, that I am afraid he never got over it in his lifetime. As you know, the Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776. As all this was going on, however, it is startling, even flabbergasting, to think that George Whitefield, the greatest revivalist preacher, had crossed the Atlantic Ocean no less than 13 times, had preached to great crowds on both sides of the Atlantic in the open air with his powerful voice and even more powerful message, and had died in 1769 in Newburyport, Massachusetts, so few years before the Boston Tea Party. Whitefield is buried in the Presbyterian Meeting House in Newburyport, so close to places where the Revolutionary War would be raging, yet his own war for the truth of the Word of God and its consequences in life was blended all through that part of history and affected lives then and now. When you sing, "Hark the herald angels sing, glory to the newborn King, peace on earth and mercy mild, God and sinners reconciled, joyful all you nations rise, join the triumph of the skies," please remember that the words of that hymn are attributed to a combination of George Whitefield and Charles Wesley and Martin Madden, and that the music is Mendelssohn's. What a beautiful blend of talents and of the understanding of the one who was born that man may no more may die, born to raise the sons of earth, born to give them second birth. That same year of 1776, Hampton-Sydney College was officially started, and among other men on its board of directors was Patrick Henry. Of course, in 1776, no one down there had ever heard of my great-great-grandfather William, nor did anyone know that Jane Stuart Smith, who would someday be at L'Abri, would be the daughter of another board member of Hampton-Sydney College in later years. And surely no one knew Frances Schaeffer would one day be graduating from Hampton-Sydney. The Tapestry's threads are amazingly woven, bringing lives into contact and not out of nowhere. William Hargill did not die of a powder blast, nor did any of the bullets hit him in the dungeon. He lived to have his wedding day on April 5th, 1794 in New London, Connecticut, when he married Elizabeth Blackley. Had he been killed, the rest of the story would have been wiped out. We have a document from the National Archives in Washington, D.C., which, although hard to read, has been deciphered in part by my sister Elsa. State of New Jersey, 6th day of November, 1848, Elizabeth Hargill, a resident of the township of Hackensack, age 74 years, doth on her oath make the following declaration in order to obtain benefit of the pension made by the Act of Congress passed July 7, 1838, entitled, that she is a widow of William Hargill, who was a seaman and captain of the Maintop, on board of some one of the United States ships or vessels during the Revolutionary War, that in frequent conversation with her said husband, from the time of her marriage until his death, she learned from him and had always understood and believed the facts to be that her said husband first shipped as powder monkey on board of the United States ship Providence in the year 1778, and that he was subsequently in the other U.S. ships or vessels in the character of seaman, and was appointed captain of the maintop, and that he was wounded on the top of his head, and also on his arm and wrist, in an engagement with the enemy, and that he carried the scars left by these wounds to his grave, that he was twice imprisoned on board of the Jersey prison ship, once for a period of 3 months and once for 6 months, that he continued in the service until he was discharged after the peace was proclaimed. Dependent cannot state the precise time. The next page is blurred, having an additional story about taking on the Jamaica fleet, and ends with the time of death of William Hargall as August 21st, 1817. So their marriage lasted only 23 years, and Elizabeth was a widow by the time she was 43. That's sad. Mm-hmm. That marriage brought into the world Abigail Hargall, who was to marry John Allen in New York City, and who would become my great-grandmother. Their daughter was named Elizabeth for her grandmother, and so it was that my grandmother, my mother's mother, Elizabeth Hargall Allen, was wooed and won by John Wesley Merritt. He was to be the only grandparent I would meet in the land of the living. I'll take just 2 sentences to cover a lot of history in saying that John Wesley Merritt came from a long line of Americans. His, quote, tree branches from one Captain Michael Pierce, who is said to have been captain of the second trip of a Mayflower, but who did not stay in America that trip. Patty Patience Pierce married a Welshman, John Amy. Their daughter, Fanny Amy, married a Gilbert Merritt, and it was their son, born near Acre Point in the Catskills, who married my grandmother and brought into existence my own mother. It may make you dizzy, but don't skip the reality that whether in biblical genealogies or in your own family tree, you wouldn't come out of nowhere, nor did any of us. Whether anyone has kept a family tree for you or not, you have one in reality. The basic dash of ice water that hits you or me in the face is that history is going somewhere, that it has always been going somewhere, and that if only we could see the total pattern, we would see how it hangs together. Yes, there is an ongoing war, and I don't mean just all the wars between nations and within nations, in which we are on the winning side, and God has told us clearly there will be a final victory. But our lives are not to consist of a shrug of the shoulder and a copping out and a saying of the equivalent of, quote, I don't matter to anybody, so I'm not going to fight any longer. Life could easily have seemed too much for my mother, and she could have just settled down to doing the easiest thing at hand in Newburgh, New York, instead of persisting in answering what she felt was God's call to her to go to China. It took a lot of persistence and the making of hard choices, however. John Wesley Merritt and Elizabeth Hargall Allen were married and lived on a farm near Newburgh, New York. Jessie Maud Merritt was born October 15, 1874, the fifth of 6 children. She was to be teased by older brothers so frequently that she felt she was ugly. Cow eyes, your eyes are so big you look like a cow and your hair is like carrots, they repeated and repeated. In actual fact, she had wonderful big blue eyes and auburn hair and was a beautiful girl, but she really didn't ever believe that. The Merritts were Baptists, in spite of the name Wesley, and were what is known as pillars in the church. Stories of the farm were favorites of ours as children. Perhaps the most repeated was about the young boy who had come straight from Scotland to help on the farm. When the large serving bowl of oatmeal, which was intended to serve the whole family, was passed to the new boy, he placed it in front of him, put sugar and cream on it, and proceeded to eat through the entire bowl. Mother's blue eyes grew bigger and bigger in astonishment that anyone could eat that much oatmeal. It seems that was a normal-sized bowl where he came from. Jessie Maud was especially good in mathematics, and when she finished high school, she got a job in the Sweet Ore Overall Company, doing accounts in the office. She was called an accountant, but I am sure that title didn't mean what it means today, and she probably added, subtracted, multiplied, and divided. In other words, did what a computer would be doing today. But computers don't have big blue eyes, auburn hair, a lovely sympathetic smile, and a compassionate interest in other human beings, nor can computers add other tasks to their mathematical job or talk the work over, training younger office girls. Another thing computers don't do is fall in love, make a decision, and get married. Walter Green was Mother's first love, and a truly fine Christian he must have been. She never talked about him to me until I was 14, and we had one of those rare evenings alone together when she didn't have any appointment and no one else was home. I hadn't even known until then that she had been married before. I'm not sure why, but I never saw any records with the name Jesse Green on them. Edith. He was a wonderful person, and I loved him very much. We planned to go to China together. I resolved that I would never marry again when he died. Let me tell this story in her words as I heard it that night, full of 14-year-old sorrow for my dear mother's young agony and suffering so many years ago, my young mother, whom I had never known, as she was 40 when I was born. Wow, that's so old back then to have a baby. We were married when I was just 20, that would be 1894, and I kept on working at Sweet-Oar offices as long as possible because we were saving up our money to go to Toronto Bible College in preparation for going to China. We had read about Hudson Taylor's work in China and felt strongly called to go with the China Inland Mission to make the gospel known where so few had ever heard. Then our first baby was born at the end of the year, a beautiful, perfectly formed, healthy, normal baby boy. The tragedy was that the cord had strangled him during birth. He was strangled to death on his own cord coming into the world. Oh, that's kind of how you had a cord around your neck when you were born. You can imagine that at this point I got up and hugged Mother so tightly I might have cracked a rib. Words didn't seem to come, but tears flowed, and it was an attempt at comforting a sorrow that was beyond my understanding, yet a sorrow that hurt, dear Mother. What an empty night that must have been. And then, Edith, 3 weeks later, Walter came home from his work with his blue eyes burning with fever, his cheeks a high pink, and his lips just too red. He looked handsome, but too bright, like a lamp that flares up just before it burns out. It was frightening. The doctor pronounced it galloping consumption, a rapidly progressing kind of tuberculosis, which in those days had no cure. No hope, was what the doctor said. They had 3 weeks, those two, to end their 1 year of marriage and to say goodbye. Mother was a widow, having lost her first baby, with 2 graves side by side in a Newburgh cemetery, the only tangible evidence of having her hopes and expectations ended by the time she was 21 years old. Can you imagine that'd be like if AJ?
Yeah. It's amazing.
This was the year 1895. The China Inland Mission had been founded in the year 1865. Hudson Taylor was an Englishman. He had started a very new kind of mission, not a denominational mission, but an interdenominational. It was a mission that he wanted to have as a work based on prayer, particularly prayer for needed funds, to carry on the work and to send forth new missionaries. Prayer meetings had been established all over England to pray for the work in China, and such prayer meetings were also beginning to be started in Canada, Switzerland, Sweden, Germany, and America. Mother had been involved in praying for China and had resolved before the Lord to go with Walter. Now that Walter had died, she did not change her direction. Her certainty was unflagging. She would not give up because of being alone, nor because of having lived through sorrow. She would save up money as she continued to work, then go to Toronto Bible College in Toronto, Canada, and prepare for China. Who says women were frightened rabbits, scared to do anything different or anything on their own? From Newburgh, New York to Toronto, Canada was not as short a distance in 1895 as it is now. But off went Jessie Maud Merritt Green to take her 3 years of Bible college, make her application to the China Inland Mission, finally go through her trial time as a candidate, receive her acceptance, and sail off from Vancouver to Shanghai in 1899, all before her 25th birthday. She arrived in China the year Adolf Hitler was 10 years old, somewhere in Germany, the year C.S. Lewis was born in England, and the year Ernst Haeckel wrote The Riddle of the Universe at the close of the 19th century, saying that matter and energy are eternal. But unaware of the various ingredients of the battle that were being launched in other parts of the world, Unaware of the war for men's minds as the explanation of materialism was being given, unaware of the war that would one day take place in the 10-year-old boys surging to a time of power in Germany, Jessie Maud was to be plunged into an immediate war situation of which she was indeed to be very aware. You see, Jessie was to arrive in China just in time to be thrown into the dangers and complications of life that the Boxer Rebellion would soon make vivid. No artificial testing time faced the new young missionary, but a war as real as the one her great-grandfather had been involved in, although it would be shorter, and she would not be a powder monkey, nor would she carry a gun. You see, it was in the same year of 1899 that the Empress Dowager gave private encouragement to a secret society called the Boxers. This name meant in literal translation, Society of Harmonious Fist. The harmonious part about it was that they all struck out at once at the foreigners and at the Chinese Christians who had embraced the foreign religion. Although the World Book Encyclopedia will tell you that 230 foreigners were murdered and that Roman Catholic and Protestant missionaries were among them, you'll be interested to know that in the China Inland Mission, 58 adult missionaries were brutally murdered with knives and machetes, and 21 of the missionaries' children. Hudson Taylor himself was not a well man at the time and was unable to rush to the aid, which would have had to have been in various directions at once, because of physical weakness which made him unable to even cross a room. It is said that he was in such anguish of soul for his missionaries who were being martyred that he himself nearly died at the time. All he could do was to pray fervently day and night for each one of them. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Hearing about that? I didn't either. The missionaries were praying fervently also for the Chinese Christians who were in danger. But before it was all over, several thousand Chinese Christians had been murdered. Mother had told me of how, covered with a blanket, she hid beneath a window sill, along with others who were hiding too. Outside that house where they hid, some were killed in plain sight of those very windows. It was during the dark of a night that Mother and others were carefully dressed and hidden in some conveyance and slipped into boats. Of course, the Wenchao River went out to sea, but so did other rivers. I am not really sure whether she was in language school at the time in Shanghai or in Wenchao, but she told of being successfully taken, along with others, to escape to Japan for a period of months. They stayed in Japan until the Boxer Rebellion was over and it was safe to return. It was August 14th, 1900, before the Boxer Madness, as it was called, began to die down. But the return from Japan was a bit after that. It must have been with a terrific seriousness and reevaluation of the cost of saying, "Anything, Lord, I'll serve you in China no matter what," on the part of these missionaries, my own mother included, that they returned and plunged into language study in earnest. When it came time to be assigned to a station, my mother was sent to Wenchao, Shiqing province, where, as you already know, she had been teaching in the girls' school for quite some time when my father arrived in 1904. Teaching in the girls' school meant, first of all, that Chinese had been mastered to a fair extent. The first language learned for our district of China was Mandarin, and then the Wenchaoese dialect. The million people who lived in Wenchao claimed that Wenchaoese was actually the oldest and purest Chinese, and they were very proud of their language indeed. Not only did Mother teach in Wenchaoese, but she had other duties connected with the school. For instance, each Saturday, or was it Friday, she had to carefully comb the girls' hair, one head at a time, with a fine-tooth comb, looking for lice, then apply the remedy to get rid of any lice that were there, ending by shampooing the hair with a special medical shampoo. Quite a different portion of her responsibility was to arrange marriages for the girls. You see, the Chinese custom of an arranged marriages threw the Chinese Christians into a quandary. If they sent their daughters to school and did not bind their feet, who on earth would marry them? An educated girl with big feet was most undesirable. The old custom, was it Gladys Aylward that helped with the unbinding of the feet?
Yeah.
That's what I thought. The old custom of preparing girls to be ladies and not peasants consisted of bending the toes under during the growing period and binding them to prevent further growth. y'all need to think about how
The
horrible that
binding
would
of the
be.
feet is just unbelievable.
Tiny hurting feet resulted, causing thus beautified girls to hobble with short, mincing steps. Oh. The CIM had a requirement, you may call it trying to westernize if you like, that any girls being admitted to the girls' school had to have their feet unbound. This is CIM was trying to end the mission, so that they could have a possibility of growing normal feet for a more comfortable walk through life. There was a boys' school also in the compound, and boys would shyly come to mother and indicate some girl they felt would be a very special one to marry. In fact, both the boys and the girls had something to say about these decisions. The, quote, arrangement was not without their asking, nor without the girl being allowed to say yes. Mother, in fact, was a go-between. Many were the hilarious stories she could tell about the funny reasons or the strange descriptions as to which girl would be first choice and which second choice, and also the definite responses both in the strong negative or the strong affirmative. The mission compound consisted of a large piece of land with the mission house built on it, a 2-story house surrounded by a veranda with a garden of grass and bamboo trees where I first played. The girls' school and the boys' school, both of which had dormitories, and a Chinese church were also in the compound. Services were attended not only by people living in the compound, but those coming from all over Winchow on Sundays and other times of meetings. In addition, there were the Chinese pastor's house, the cook's house, Ami's house, and the houses of others who worked on the compound, including dear old Adgipa, the gatekeeper. Yes, there was a gate in the high wall surrounding the entire compound, a stone wall needed to keep out bandits and thieves. The locked gates were of solid wood with a lattice-work window across them, through which Adgipa looked to see who might be wanting to come in and made certain it was someone whom he could trust to be honest. The living room of the mission house had windows out onto the veranda so that anyone sitting in there could see not only the garden, but whoever was walking along the veranda. Of course, whoever was walking along the veranda could also see into the living room. George Hugh Seville hit upon a plan whereby he could bypass the rules to, quote, have a word alone with Jessie Maud Merritt Green. One day, Jessie was embroidering, sitting close to the window for better light on her work. Up and down the veranda George walked, trying to catch the attention of his beloved person. With daisies he had picked from the garden, extra stuffed in his pocket, no doubt, he walked jauntily along, daisy in left hand, held as obviously as possible, right hand plucking petals. She loves me not. She loves me not. She loves me not. Was she deaf and blind? She loves me not. I don't know how many daisies he demolished before Jessie looked up with as stern a look as she could muster and said, the answer is no. As far as she was concerned, it was definite and final. She told me in that one time of sharing confidences, I thought he was a cheeky extrovert breaking rules surreptitiously and trying to be so clever. I wasn't the least impressed, and I meant no. However, George was in love, and George was a persistent person with much imagination. In the following days, not only did he write to his brother to send a diamond ring, but he prayed a lot about Jessie's changing her mind. He had no intention of taking no as a final answer. Time after time, he had asked her the same question, finding moments, finding opportunities to ask again and again. Had he stopped, there would be no story to tell. Had she been stubborn forever and stuck to her resolution never to marry again, no matter how she felt about anyone, there would be no story to tell. In that same moment of telling me about it, Mother had said, really, I still dreamt in my sleep about Walter, and although I was growing fond of George, I felt as if I would be a bigamist. You know what a bigamist is? No. Someone married to more than one person. There are a few things that are important to say right here. First, it is important not to have standards lower than the Bible, but also not to have standards higher than the Bible. God who made us knows our needs and did say that, quote, until death do us part, is to be the length of oneness. It is not that it is necessary to marry again, but one must realize one is not lower on some spiritual measuring stick if one marries again after becoming a widow or widower. Second, there is more to marriage than happiness or personal fulfillment or even companionship. Marriage is also a oneness which brings forth something into history which would not have been there otherwise. Never forget that in the midst of the foggy, mistaken ideas of marriage that drift around in the 20th century, history would be different in so many ways had not there been the impact on other people of the two, as well as the bringing forth of whatever children result from the oneness. The mystery of being is all bound up in this, and so is the ongoing war, intellectually, spiritually, and in every area where the enemy attacks. A far too trivial idea of marriage prevails today, without the astonishing and frightening reality of what may or may not happen 100 years from now, if, and if not, your existence has significance. The 10th time the question was asked, the answer was yes. So in Shanghai, on March 29, 1905, a wedding was held in the mission headquarters of the China Inland Mission. The bride and groom were dressed in Chinese dress, George with his own pigtail hanging proudly down his back, and Jessie not looking a bit Chinese, but very demure in her brocaded gown over the trousers, the mandarin collar setting off her auburn hair, her blue eyes, and the pink and white complexion that went with it. 5 years after her death, almost 55 years later, George was to write to his son-in-law, Ralph Bragdon, "This is the 60th anniversary of our marriage in Shanghai, 1905, the beginning of 55 years, within 2 months and a few days of a wonderful life together. I realize now more than I ever did before what a talented, tactful, and true wife Mother Seville was, what a help she was to others. For example, the wives of students and teachers in Faith Seminary, as well as the girls in the girls' school in Winchow, and the Bible women and members of the Winchow Church. Her own daughters, too, owe their mother a lot for their skills and for certain of their traits and character." That was written after 55 years of living together and having much experience of what, quote, "for better and for worse," had been all about in their own piece of history. When Father was reminiscing to Susan when he was 97, he laughed as he told of Janet's birth. The other missionary couples in Winchow had no children, and the local Chinese church people were a bit curious about Westerners because of that. When Jessie and I had a child, we realized our stock had gone up. We were considered to be really normal human beings. Janet Elizabeth was born January 13th, 1906. Then on November 7th, 1907, a boy was born, named John for his two grandfathers. You can imagine the rejoicing on both sides of the Pacific Ocean at that news of his birth. His was a short life, and his death was a deep sorrow mother and father never got over. Does one ever get over death? How clearly the Lord tells us that the last enemy to be destroyed is death. Death is an enemy and is a result of the fall. Bodies and souls were made to be together, not to be torn apart. Thank God for the final restoration we look forward to at the time of the resurrection, of which Christ's resurrection was the first fruits. I have John Eldridge Seville's baby book here, and on a page next to the one with a sweet picture of mother holding her 5-month-old son are the notations of his life. Quote, "Began to roll all the way over May 25th, began to creep July 1st, began to pull himself up by crib rail July 10th, walked the length of his crib 2 days later, took him to Chefoo, North China, the beginning of July, where he died July 25th, buried in the new cemetery, Chefoo. The doctor's certificate is still clear. July 25th, 1908, I hereby certify that John E. Seville of Winchow, aged 8 months, died in my presence at Chefoo, and the cause of death was gastroenteritis and diarrhea. Signed, Albert Hogue, M.D. I also have the official document reported the death of an American citizen from the American Consular Service in Shanghai. This American citizen, being 8 months and 18 days old, a native-born American citizen residing in Winchell in this consular district. What possible difference to history could that short life have had? Yet it would be unfair to go on without making it emphatic that not only is John in heaven now, having been with his parents and grandparents for a long time, but also that his birth, short life, and death have made a difference. His life and death gave a sweetness and sympathetic understanding to Jessie Seville, which helped many young mothers and other people in the midst of their sorrows. Not even a wee baby slips into the water and causes no ripple. The tapestry is different because of the existence of that person. My sister Elsa Ruth was born October 24th, 1909 in Winchell. She was there as a loving big sister to welcome me at my birth, although Janet was off in Schaeffer School, the CIM boarding school, and had the rather flat experience of being called into the headmistress's room to be told, "You have a new baby sister," with no previous warning. This is the picture of, I think that is Edith's parents.
Wow.
Janet or is it Janet? And George Seville.
That's really neat.
It's a great picture.
It is a good picture.
It's really clear.
It's got to be from the early 1900s.
Yeah, that's what it is, yeah. In 1814, 100 years before I was born, the War of 1812 was still going on, and Washington, D.C. was being burned. It is I just learned about this. This is when
the
they...
War of 1812.
Yeah, this is when they wrote...
the Star-Spangled Banner.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It is recorded that both the White House and the Capitol building were burned, and their red brick exteriors were hopelessly stained. To cover the damage, the bricks were painted white after that disaster, and they remain glistening white to this day. In 1914, the First World War broke forth, the war that was to end all wars and make the world safe for democracy. This great proclamation reminds one of a sentence from Augustine's City of God. Even wars, then, are waged with peace as their object, even when they are waged by those who are concerned to exercise their warlike prowess, either in command or in the actual fighting. Hence, it is an established fact that peace is the desired end of war. If you have read Volume 2 of Malcolm Muggeridge's Chronicles of Wasted Time, you have had a fascinating view in the second section, quote, "A Grinning Honor," of the Second World War, as seen from his astute and humorous accounts of life at the GHQ Home Forces. Francis Schaeffer was just 2 years and 8 months old, so he was having no personal, quote, viewpoints of the First World War, humorous or otherwise, when it broke out. Nor did he know that half the world away, a war baby was being born who would affect his life. I used to resent the label I was given in casual conversation when I was little. Oh yes, Edith was a war baby. The label was given evidently to babies born in 1914. The official report of birth of children born to American parents, American Consular Service, states that Edith Rachel Merritt Seville, sex female, date of birth November 3rd, 1914, 9 a.m., was born at Flower Garden Lane, Winchell, China, and that the doctor was Dr. E.T.A. Stedford, United Methodist Mission, Winchell, China. Although I was born at 9 o'clock in the morning of November 3rd, this official cablegram, registering my birth in Washington, D.C., as was necessary, arrived in Washington on November 2nd due to the time difference, which has always given me some delight in knowing that, in a sense, my grandparents and relatives knew about it a day ahead of time, or that I might feel I could celebrate 2 days. That's what you would do, wouldn't you, Collie? The ages of my parents given on this official report are George Hugh Seville, age 38, Jessie Merritt Seville, age 40. Remembering that mother could have been killed during the Boxer Rebellion, as were 58 of her fellow missionary friends, and that she had said no to my father 9 times and had meant not to change her mind, along with all the other impossibilities. Add this, that today doctors are advising women to abort if they are as old as 40. The likelihood of my existence having come about by chance is very slim. The hope that I would be a boy was strong in my parents, I know. When Elsa was told I was a girl, she stood looking at me and then sighed a deep 5-year-old sigh of disappointment, asking with a shred of hope, "Don't boys sometimes have brown hair?" My, quote, welcome was not an ecstatic one, although love and acceptance were there. The day was going to come when not only a little boy would be glad that I had been a girl, but others whose lives and existence would be dependent on that which had brought disappointment to my immediate family. Meantime, the war raged in Europe, but in China, German, British, American, and Swiss missionaries worked side by side against a common enemy, working in togetherness in the same army the Lord is speaking about when he says, fight the good fight. Here were individuals whose passports were from countries at war with each other and from a neutral country. They were getting letters from relatives telling of tragic deaths, lost properties, uprooted family lives and lands. Can't you imagine the strained, uncomfortable moments when the mail arrived and was being opened? Can't you imagine reading conflicting news in whatever newspapers trickled through? War casualties bringing tears to be comforted by Christian brothers and sisters whose earthly blood relatives were divided by sharp lines on the maps. As history flows on, time puts a distance between us and our ancestors who were on different sides. So often we are blended in one physical family. Wars and rumors of wars. So often the Lord's people, the sheep of his pasture, are strangely caught on battlefields or waiting for fearful news from half the world away about cities, towns, villages, land, and the people comprising all that the word home includes. The marvel is that actually heaven is our home country, and our citizenship there is not an airy-fairy kind of spiritual fable, but more real than anything on earth. The miracle is that there is a oneness that needs no earthly papers to prove, no earthly passport to identify, a oneness of the people of God, the Lord's family, the bride of Christ, which exists. This oneness can cross all barriers at any point of history, whether they be barriers of civil or global war, or the barriers in the sad wars dividing people in heated theological discussion. God himself knows who is on the Lord's side, and his army is united in the reality of what will count all through eternity. The China Inland Mission did not fall apart during the First World War, nor did the Revolutionary War stop missionaries from America, descendants of soldiers, from coming into the work of British Hudson Taylor, nor will Satan's devices to assail the true oneness of God and his people ever prevail. Thank God. That's it.
That's really good.